Okay, question number 2. Recently, you have taken up the task of depicting Times Square and city scenes. What prompted this change in subject matter from the symbolic life journey of the major arcana and the cosmic dance series of paintings you had completed in the past few years?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think because when I did I have to go through the process of feeling, and when I did the tarot painting, it was in a response to a particular crisis. As you know, when your father died, it devastated me. And the journey of the tarot was a way that I found to deal with loss and with sorrow, with personal loss and with sorrow, and to come to terms with it. And after that, because the subject matter was so intense, I wanted to free myself and do something that was just about feeling. So, and just about the process of paint, of what paint does. So that's why I did what later I call the Cosmic Dance series. And when I went through that particular phase of freeing myself from an intense subject matter, I became interested in things that were more structural. Now, why I decided to go to do the Times Square series was because I wanted to go back to where I came from. And I came from illustration. That was the first thing I did in art, was illustration. And I left it when I came to America and became a landscape painter. The many years of doing illustration. And most of the illustrations were lost, as you know, in the crisis that happened in London, in my mother's house. So I didn't have any of my work to refer to. But I did remember where it came from, and I wanted to go back to telling stories. And the Times Square series was a way of telling a story. And the story was about the city, about the relationship of people to the structures of the city, to where they found themselves, and the dynamic of those different juxtapositions of shapes and colors and harmony, and particularly geometry. Now, I never really got into anything geometric in my art, consciously. This time I wanted to be more conscious about it, but not to make art about geometry, and not to do the geometry of the Times Square series, but to use the geometry of the subject matter as a background to the people. So there was kind of for me, a tension between the amorphous shapes of the people and the very structured shapes of the background.
Number 3, what do you feel you have learned as a more mature artist that you didn't understand when you were embarking on your career as a painter for the first time years ago?
What have I learned? Okay, that's a difficult question to say what I've learned, because I think every time I come to paint, I feel I'm learning all over again. Every time I approach a canvas, I feel I know nothing, and I'm starting all over again. So I'm learning as I'm doing. And I think that I have learned that that's okay. I've learned that that's okay to feel that you don't know anything, and that you're starting all over again, and that it's scary, and that nothing is more daunting than a white canvas. Nothing is more beautiful. Nothing is more perfect than a white canvas. You've got to destroy that whiteness, and you've got to start somewhere. So it's okay. It's okay to make it ugly first. It's okay to take this beautiful canvas and make it ugly, and then try to make that beautiful again. So it's a constant struggle. It's a constant, nothing is a given for me. Nothing is a given.
What are some of the current trends you are noticing in the art world today, and which of these trends do you feel an affinity for, if any?
I don't really know much about the trends in the art world. What I see when I go to see exhibitions, and I very rarely go to the city, but when I do, when I see some shows, they struck me. Some people struck me, some artists strike me as being very exciting and trying very hard to create something meaningful and beautiful at the same time. But for the most part, it seems to be bigger and bigger and emptier and emptier. And I find that disheartening. And I think another thing is I see a lot of bad art, and that is extremely depressing. But seeing good art makes you want to go to the studio and work. And I have seen some good art. And that sort of compensated for all the empty, pompous, self-congratulatory art that I've, so-called art that I have seen, if that's the trend that you're talking about. Unfortunately, there's too much of it. There doesn't seem to be a level.
How do you deal with the rapid change in technology, communications, and expression in art? And is it affecting you or your process in any way?
Well, I know that it's very important to many artists to use technology and as a process, but I'm afraid that I'm really a hands-on kind of artist, and using technology seems, for my purposes, secondhand. If I cannot feel a direct connection between the brush and the canvas, or between my hands and the canvas, I am alienated from it, and I have to feel part of it. I have to feel that the work is part of me and what I want to say, and I'm afraid that technology has sort of gone beyond me. Maybe it's my age, I don't know, possibly, but I don't think I ever would have been that particular kind of an artist. I don't think so.
Are there any artists living and working today whose work you like?
Yes, I've always liked the work, I've always admired the work of Malcolm Morley and Michael Major. I just love their work. I love everything they do. And there's a wonderful landscape artist called Martha Armstrong, who I admire very much. She's a very different kind of artist to me, very different. And I could never paint like her. I know what she wanted to paint like me. But she just has a wonderful sense of color and form and shape. And yes, and she's a contemporary, and I am probably a little younger than I, and I admire her work very much.
Do you find...
Among many other artists whose work I like, and I can't remember their names right now. Go ahead.
All right.
It's okay.
Do you find that how an artist speaks of his or her own expression is as important as the work itself, or less important?
To me, it's less important. To me, it's much less important, because sometimes I see work that's very empty, to me, visually empty, because I'm a visual person, and work has to speak to me visually. And if it doesn't, and I have to hear the artist talk about it endlessly and justify it and read all sorts of pompous rubbish, which so much of art writing is, I find it depressing. Actually, it's depressing, because there's a kind of an emptiness about it, a lack of real integrity, a lack of skill very often, and of saying anything. What are you saying?
We had a brief discussion off camera about one of your contemporaries' view of Marcel Duchamp and Klaus Oldenburg. Of course, there would be no Oldenburg without Duchamp. What are your thoughts about work like Oldenburg's oversized paperclip?
Oh, I admire that. I admire that so much, because, first of all, it's completely not where I am, but I admire that sense of taking something very simple and ordinary, and by changing the scale and the context, it is monumental. And I think that is fantastic. And you know who else did that? Léger. Léger did it in his drawings. And don't think that Oldenburg didn't see Léger's drawings, in which he would take something very simple, like a glove, and blow it up and make something very monumental and scary in a way. And Oldenburg did this, and of course Duchamp is the father he's the father of this kind of thinking. And I have great admiration for Duchamp and for his thinking.
What is the purpose of art for you?
Well, I'm not a literary, I love literature, I love to read, but I'm not a literary person. And I think for me, expressing myself in art, in my art, is a way of understanding what I see and interpreting it in a different way. For example, I use many photographic references for my images, as image reference, but I don't adhere to them. I use them as a sort of bouncing off, as a sort of start for an idea. And then I invent as I go along. But I always use the photographic references as something to start from, as an idea, like as if like I'm looking at a landscape and it gives me an idea for a landscape painting. When I look at photographic references of, say, Times Square, for example, it gives me an idea of how to change it and make not an exact replica of an image that I've seen, or of the actual Times Square, which is so fantastic and so exciting that I couldn't possibly compete with it, but to create another world, a parallel world to it, a parallel world that would be an equivalent in painting of what I felt when I saw it. So it's not the same, and it's not a photographic rendition, and it's not photographic realism, but it's an interpretation. It's another way of interpreting something you see.
How do real acrylic or oil on canvas paintings enhance living spaces more richly than do prints or photographic posters and reproductions?
Well, I think it has to do with the immediacy of seeing the brush strokes, of seeing how the artist did it, of seeing some of the mistakes that the artist has made that you don't see when you see a photograph of it. You don't see the sometimes crudeness of a rendition, which in a reproduction you don't see. It's all smoothed over. Everything is equal. There are no bumps and lumps, and there's no feeling of the hand that did it.
And last but not least, which part of history of American painting do you feel your work is most closely aligned with?
Well, I don't know, but I would like to think that in all my work, I try to tell a story of some kind. When I was for many, many years a landscape painter, there was a kind of a narrative in it. It had to do with the relationships of different textures, one to the other, and the continuation of it, the contiguity of it, that approximated what I felt about nature, not necessarily what I saw, but what I felt as well as what I saw. When I did the narrative paintings that had to do with the disaster series that I did, was it also telling a story, in a way telling how I felt about those terrible situations. The Balkan Wars, the dislocation and loss, the 9/11 and the horror that we felt, and the trauma as Americans that we felt, that each one of us felt we were personally attacked in a place that we thought was so safe. And I tried to convey that in my art. And the same thing when I did the Journey of the Tarot. I tried to tell the story of their life.
What is the best way to commission a painting from you, or simply to buy a work of art from you? Do you have an agent who sells your work, or can the public buy directly from your studio?
I don't think that I want to talk about that in this particular
Do you have
context.
any social media accounts through which others can be in touch with you? Like a Facebook page or a Twitter presence or LinkedIn?
I think I have Facebook.
So
but I'm not very active. I'm not very active on Facebook.
Someone can hypothetically send you a message or a question about your work on Facebook, correct?
Yes, or through my website.
Or through your website,
Or,
which is...
although it has right now I have to change a phone number on the website because it's not
current. So that's thelmaappel.com?
I think so, yeah. I have to check that.
Okay.
The website needs work, by the way, so
That's okay. That will be a work in progress as
it'll be
well.
it's a work. Yeah, my website right now is a work in progress.
No problem.
Yeah,
Websites
yeah.
always are.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can call me.
At 475-235-3110.
Correct.
Thank you so much. And this is signing off for Thelma Appel, artist in her studio in New Haven County, Connecticut, November 9th, 2015.